Do you ever feel like you're just constantly on? You know that feeling, like a low hum of stress just buzzing in the background, even when there's nothing obviously dangerous happening?
Oh, absolutely. It's almost the default state for so many people now. Deadlines, emails, just life.
Exactly. And what's really wild, and honestly a bit scary when you think about it, is how your body reacts. It's like that ancient survival wiring. It kicks in for that mental stuff just as hard as if you were, actually running from a tiger.
That's the crux of it, isn't it? Your fight or flight system, flooding you with hormones like cortisol and adrenaline.
Yeah.
It was designed for short bursts of intense physical threat.
Right? Saber-toothed tiger scenario.
Precisely. But now, worrying about finances, getting stuck in traffic, that email you haven't answered, your body doesn't really differentiate. The hormonal cascade is basically the same.
Which is kind of a problem in the modern world. That system's getting triggered constantly.
It is. And that chronic activation had some really significant effects throughout your entire body.
So that's what we're diving into today. We're going to unpack insights from some material you shared, really zone in on these stress hormones, cortisol, adrenaline, and crucially explore what the sources suggest we can actually do about it.
Yeah, practical stuff. Things like specific foods, nutrients, even a surprisingly simple technique that might help manage that constant stress response.
Exactly. We want to understand the why you feel perpetually stressed, but also give you some actionable takeaways based on these sources, looking at how to potentially lower those key hormones and find a bit more calm.
Sounds good. And I think to really grasp the solutions, we need to first properly understand the main players in this stress drama, the hormones themselves.
Right. Cortisol and adrenaline, we hear cortisol thrown around all the time.
Yeah.
The stress hormone, right? How do they actually work together?
Well, cortisol is definitely the primary one we link with ongoing chronic stress, adrenaline. The sources describe it sometimes as a hormone, sometimes more like a neurotransmitter or a kind of hormone-like compound. It's maybe a bit more complex, but they definitely team up. They orchestrate the body's whole stress reaction, different roles, slightly different origins.
But they both come from the adrenal glands, yeah. Those little glands sitting on top of the kidneys.
That's the spot. The adrenal gland is key here. It's got layers, basically. An inner part, the medulla, that's where adrenaline comes from, and then the outer layer, the cortex, that's cortisol central.
So inside makes adrenaline, outside makes cortisol. Got it. And their job is prepare for battle.
Essentially, yeah, adapt the body to whatever threat it perceives. Adrenaline gives you that instant jolt, heart races, breathing quickens, senses sharpen. You're ready now.
Fight or flight, literally.
Right. Cortisol takes a little longer to ramp up, but it sustains that state. It pours glucose into your blood for energy, dials down things deemed non-essential right now, like digestion or parts of the immune system, and helps keep your blood pressure up.
And circling back to that key point, the body fires up this whole intense system, whether it's a real physical threat or just, mental overwhelm from your inbox.
That's the modern trap. Our ancestors needed it for, escaping predators. Short, intense, physical. We get it from chronic, often abstract, mental pressures. The body just registers stress and keeps pumping out cortisol and adrenaline, sometimes for days, weeks, even longer.
Which is definitely not what it was designed for. So, okay, before we get into the physical fallout later on, how does someone even know if their cortisol is chronically high? Can you, measure it easily?
You can measure it directly, yeah. Blood tests, saliva tests are the common ways. But the sources point out a big practical hurdle with just, say, one test.
Why is that?
Because cortisol isn't static. It has a natural rhythm, a circadian rhythm.
Yeah.
It's typically highest right when you wake up in the morning, and then it gradually drops throughout the day, reaching its lowest point around midnight or early morning.
Ah, so a single snapshot doesn't tell you much about the overall pattern.
Exactly. To really map it out, you'd ideally need samples pretty frequently, maybe every 4 hours or so. And for saliva tests, well, that can mean setting an alarm to wake yourself up in the middle of the night to spit in a tube.
Okay, that sounds incredibly counterproductive if you're trying to reduce stress.
Right. It's hardly relaxing. So because of these kinds of difficulties, the sources suggest looking at a different measure. It's indirect, but arguably more practical day to day, and it gives you a really good window into your overall stress state and nervous system balance. It's called heart rate variability, or HRV.
HRV. Yeah, I've seen that metric pop up on fitness trackers and stuff. What exactly is it measuring? How does it connect to cortisol?
Okay, so HRV isn't just your heart rate. It's the tiny variations in time between each consecutive heartbeat, milliseconds. It sounds weird maybe because you might think a super steady metronome-like heartbeat is best.
Yeah, I probably would have thought that.
But actually, a healthy, adaptable nervous system shows constant, subtle fluctuations. Think of it like steering a car smoothly. You make tiny adjustments constantly. A stressed, rigid system is more like being locked into one gear, unable to adapt easily.
Okay, so more variation is actually a good sign. Flexibility.
Exactly. High variability suggests your system is responsive, adaptable. Low variability suggests it's under strain, likely stuck in stress mode. And that variability, it's a direct reflection of your autonomic nervous system.
Right, the automatic pilot. Breathing, heart rate, digestion, all this stuff happening without conscious thought.
Precisely. It's running the show behind the scenes. And it has those two main branches that work kind of like a seesaw in opposition to each other. The sympathetic and the parasympathetic.
The classic DERO. Fight or flight versus rest and digest.
You got it. Sympathetic is your gas pedal. Stress, danger, excitement. It ramps things up, gets you ready for action, and here's the direct link we're looking for. Activating the sympathetic system is what tells your adrenal glands, okay, release the cortisol and adrenaline.
So stress hits, sympathetic goes into overdrive, and boom, cortisol levels rise.
Exactly. Now, the parasympathetic system, that's your brake pedal. It's the rest and digest mode. Active when you're chilling out, sleeping, digesting food, recovering. It conserves energy, promotes repair.
And ideally, a healthy person switches smoothly between these two states, right? Sympathetic for action, parasympathetic to recover and recharge.
That's the goal. High HRV generally means you've got good balance, good flexibility between the two. Your body can shift gears appropriately. Low HRV often indicates that the sympathetic system is dominant. You're stuck with the gas pedal floored, you're in that chronic stress state, and your ability to recover is compromised.
And that sympathetic dominance is tied directly to higher cortisol.
Directly linked. So tracking your HRV over time gives you this really valuable, non-invasive insight into how stressed your system is overall, reflecting that cortisol picture indirectly.
That makes a lot of sense. It's like a dashboard for your internal stress levels. So what throws this whole system out of whack? What pushes us so hard into that sympathetic high cortisol state?
But this is where the source material makes a really strong, maybe surprising connection to diet. It specifically highlights how eating a lot of sugar and refined starches basically really messes up the autonomic nervous system.
Wow. Okay. How does sugar do that? It seems like just energy, but how does it disrupt this fundamental control system?
The explanation given is that when you consistently have high blood sugar levels from those kinds of foods, it directly interferes with the way the autonomic nerves function and communicate. It essentially keeps that sympathetic gas pedal pressed down and makes it harder for the parasympathetic brake to engage properly.
So it's not just about the calories or the weight gain potential, it's actively disrupting your body's ability to regulate stress.
That's the mechanism described. It keeps you biochemically stuck in a stress mode. And the sources use some pretty serious examples to drive this home. They talk about conditions like diabetic dysautonomia.
Okay, that sounds not good.
It literally means your autonomic nervous system is messed up because of diabetes, because of chronic high blood sugar. It's a situation where the high sugar levels have actually caused physical damage to those autonomic nerves.
Actual nerve damage to the system controlling your heart rate, digestion, all that automatic stuff?
Yes. It's incredibly serious. It can impact nerves controlling almost anything, automatic heart, blood pressure regulation, stomach emptying, sweating. The sources mention things like gastroparesis, where your stomach just doesn't empty properly, and diabetic autonomic neuropathy. It's all pointing to the fact that these crucial nerves are being harmed by persistently high blood sugar.
Jeez. So the very system that's supposed to help you calm down and recover is itself being damaged by a diet high in sugar and refined carbs, which in turn keeps the stress system activated.
It's a perfect storm, really. A vicious cycle where diet directly fuels the stress response at a neurological level.
Okay, so if sugar and starches are the big villains pushing you into sympathetic overdrive, what's the dietary strategy the sources point to as the antidote?
Logically, it's the opposite approach, adopting a low-carb or ketogenic diet. Often they mention combining this with some form of fasting. There's reference to research, possibly one of the only studies of its kind, showing that plans involving very low calories and very low carbs, think ketogenic, maybe even something like 1 meal a day, or OMAD if it's keto, can significantly support and improve the health of the autonomic nervous system.
Right. Take away the thing causing the problem. How does reducing carbs help restore that balance?
Well, by dramatically cutting down on sugars and starches, you basically remove that constant chemical assault on the autonomic nerves. You stop those wild blood sugar swings that keep triggering the sympathetic system inappropriately. Gives the whole system a chance to, recalibrate.
Makes sense. And where does fasting fit into this picture?
The sources highlight research suggesting that fasting, even just intermittent fasting, seems to specifically boost the parasympathetic nervous system, the rest and digest side.
Ah, so that might explain why people often say they feel really calm or mentally sharp when they're fasting.
That seems to be the connection, yeah. Their brake pedal system is getting a chance to be more dominant.
Fascinating. Tying that feeling of calm directly to a physiological shift driven by diet and fasting.
Absolutely. So the overall idea presented is that moving towards low carb, maybe keto, and maybe incorporating fasting helps shift that seesaw, the sympathetic-parasympathetic balance, back towards the middle, or even towards the parasympathetic side. And because sympathetic activation drives cortisol, this shift naturally helps lower cortisol levels.
Leading to feeling less wired, less anxious, more calm.
Exactly. And there's even a personal story shared in the material that really illustrates this.
Oh, yeah.
One of the speakers mentioned having extremely high cortisol levels themselves at one point in their life. And when they look back, they realized it directly coincided with the period where they were eating, in their words, massive amounts of carbohydrates. As soon as they drastically cut the carbs, their cortisol levels came down significantly, and they felt a huge difference in their stress levels and general state of being. It's a pretty stark example of the principle they're describing.
So step 1 is cutting out the major offenders, sugar, refined carbs, and low-carb keto fasting are potent tools for resetting. But what about actively adding things? Are there specific nutrients or foods the sources highlight to support calm and buffer against stress?
Yes, definitely. This is the other side of the coin, building resilience. The sources identify several key nutritional players that are really important for supporting the autonomic nervous system and helping your body produce those calming signals. Think of it as giving your body the raw materials it needs.
Okay, let's dig into those. Where should we start? Vitamins.
B vitamins get a big mention. Specifically, B12 is flagged as absolutely essential for the health and proper function of the autonomic nervous system itself.
B12, that's mostly from animal foods, right?
Primarily, yes. Red meat, fish, poultry, eggs. Organ meats are particularly rich sources, and the sources are clear. If you're deficient in B12, it can directly cause problems with your autonomic function. It makes it harder for your body to regulate things smoothly, including your stress response.
So getting enough D12 is foundational for this whole system. It's not just about energy levels.
Not at all. Then there's B1, which is thiamine, and B5, pantothenic acid. These two are highlighted as crucial for producing a really important neurotransmitter called acetylcholine.
Acetylcholine. Okay, refresh my memory. What's its role in the stress-calm equation?
Acetylcholine is the main chemical messenger used by your parasympathetic nervous system. Remember, that's the rest and digest, the brake pedal system. To activate that calming state, slow your heart rate, relax. You need enough acetylcholine signaling happening.
Okay. So B1 and B5 are needed to make the calm down chemical. Where do we find those?
Nutritional yeast gets a special shout out as a good source, along with things like sunflower seeds. Actually, there's an interesting anecdote in the material about people noticing they feel calmer, sometimes just minutes after taking nutritional yeast.
Really? Just from nutritional yeast? In minutes?
Yeah, the suggestion is it might be providing those B vitamins rapidly, boosting acetylcholine production quickly. It's anecdotal, of course, but points to the potential immediacy. However, the sources add a crucial piece. B1 and B5 are helpers, but to actually build acetylcholine, you need the main building block.
And that is?
Choline. Choline is the direct precursor molecule your body uses to synthesize acetylcholine. No choline, no acetylcholine, or at least not enough.
Okay, so it's a team effort. B1, B5, and choline are all needed for that parasympathetic boost. Where's the best source of choline?
According to these sources, the absolute king of choline is egg yolks. Eating whole eggs, making sure you get those yolks, is presented as a fantastic way to supply that crucial building block. Organ meats, like liver, are also mentioned as excellent sources. Supporting acetylcholine production this way directly helps counteract stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline.
Got it. B vitamins, choline. Essential for the calming system. What else is on the list?
Minerals are huge. Potassium and magnesium are described as physiological relaxers.
Physiological relaxers. I like the sound of that. We could all use some of those.
Definitely. They literally help calm the body down physically, support that rest state, and they also play a role in helping to lower cortisol levels.
And didn't you mention earlier something about stress affecting these minerals?
Yes, this is such a key point from the sources.
Right.
Being under chronic stress, having high cortisol, it actually depletes your body's stores of both potassium and magnesium. And guess what else depletes them? A diet high in sugar and refined starches.
Oh, come on. That's just unfair. The things causing the stress also rob you of the nutrients you need to cope with it.
It's a nasty feedback loop, isn't it?
Yeah.
So making sure you get enough becomes extra important. And the sources are pretty clear on one of the best ways to get a good dose of both together. Load up on deep, leafy green vegetables, big salads, think spinach, kale, romaine, chard. They're packed with both potassium and magnesium.
Big salads. Simple, effective. Okay, what's next on the nutritional support team?
Vitamin D3. The sources point out that being deficient in vitamin D3 can cause significant issues for the autonomic nervous system's function.
Vitamin D, usually we hear about it for bones, maybe immunity. How does it plug into stress regulation?
Well, you get it from sunlight, fatty fish like wild-caught salmon. But the sources make a really interesting point. Vitamin D, they say, acts much more like a hormone in the body than just a simple vitamin. And fascinatingly, some of its functions are actually quite similar to cortisol's functions.
Wait, similar to cortisol. But we want to lower cortisol. How does that work?
It seems counterintuitive, but here's the connection they describe. It appears to be an inverse relationship. High cortisol levels tend to drive down vitamin D levels. So people who are chronically stressed or have conditions associated with high cortisol often test low in vitamin D.
So high stress kind of burns through your vitamin D or blocks it somehow.
That seems to be the observation. So the thinking is, by ensuring you have adequate vitamin D levels, maybe through sun, food, or supplementation if needed, you might actually help your body better modulate or regulate its cortisol response. It's like you're supporting the overall hormonal balance, potentially giving you some of the same benefits for stress, inflammation, or sleep as directly lowering cortisol would.
Huh. That's a really unexpected angle. Using vitamin D to help keep cortisol in check shows how interconnected it all is.
It really does. Okay, moving along. We mentioned the vagus nerve earlier briefly, that huge nerve running from the brain down to the gut and other organs, a major player in the parasympathetic system.
Right, the whole brain-gut connection thing.
Exactly. And the sources suggest a way to support the vagus nerve, and therefore your parasympathetic calm-down system, is by focusing on your gut health specifically, by adding probiotics.
So the bacteria living in your gut can influence your nervous system's ability to relax.
That's the link they draw. By eating probiotic-rich foods, think sauerkraut, kefir, kimchi, certain pickles, or using a probiotic supplement, you help foster a healthy gut microbiome. This healthy gut environment seems to send positive signals up the vagus nerve to the brain, encouraging a more parasympathetic state.
And this even ties into sleep, you said.
Yes, the sources mention this might be why some people report sleeping much better if they have something like kefir before bed. It helps their system shift into that relaxed rest and digest mode that's necessary for good sleep.
Man, it just keeps coming back to how everything's connected. Gut health impacting stress and sleep. Wild.
It's all one system, really. A powerful feedback loop. Okay, one more category from the sources. This one involves leveraging specific compounds from plants.
Phytonutrients.
Exactly. The material touches on drug discovery research, noting that a huge chunk, like 50 to 70% of modern medicines, either came directly from plants or were inspired by plant compounds.
Nature's medicine cabinet, basically.
Pretty much. And in the context of tackling stress hormones, one particular phytonutrient gets highlighted based on the research referenced, EGCG.
EGCG rings a bell. Where's that found?
It's one of the main active compounds in green tea. The sources describe EGCG as a powerful phytonutrient, citing research suggesting it's effective at helping to reduce cortisol levels. They even mention it being studied as a potential therapeutic target for stress issues, and importantly, that it seems to have virtually no side effects.
Wow. A natural compound from tea with that kind of potential backing.
That's what the material suggests. And they add the observation that because it's natural and can't be patented, it's unlikely to become a big pharmaceutical drug, even with promising research.
So readily available, potentially potent natural cortisol support.
Seems like it. The simple advice offered is just to make green tea a regular part of your routine. Doesn't have to be gallons, even just a little bit, but consistently, as they put it, could offer real benefits for managing cortisol. Plus, it's cheap and easy.
That feels very doable. Did they mention any other plant compounds that might influence cortisol?
Briefly, yes. They referenced a book that discussed a few others that seem to inhibit a specific enzyme involved in cortisol regulation.
Ah, yes, the one with the super long name.
That's the one. 11-beta-hydroxysteroid dehydrogenase type 1. Definitely a mouthful. But basically, this enzyme converts inactive cortisone into active cortisol within certain tissues. So compounds that inhibit it might help lower active cortisol levels locally.
And what were those inhibitors?
They mentioned licorice, curcumin, which is the active bit in turmeric, and they quipped it seems to be good for everything, and also something called emotin, found in Japanese knotweed.
Interesting. So green tea seems like the main star, but maybe turmeric or licorice could play a supporting role too, based on that mechanism?
Potentially, yeah. Though the focus seemed mostly on the green tea. So bringing it all together nutritionally, avoid the sugars and starches, consider low-carb keto fasting, and then actively support the system with things like B vitamins, choline, potassium, magnesium, vitamin D, probiotics for the gut, and maybe regular green tea. It's a pretty comprehensive strategy outlined in these sources.
Okay, we've covered the triggers, the hormonal response, and the nutritional support. But let's talk about the flip side. If someone doesn't manage chronic high cortisol, what's the actual damage? What are the physical consequences the sources lay out?
Yeah, this is where it gets pretty serious and underscores why this isn't just about feeling stressed. Chronic high cortisol, whether it's from psychological stress, poor diet, or even those genetic enzyme things mentioned, it causes real, tangible harm across multiple body systems.
It's definitely more than just a mood thing then.
Oh, much more. Mentally and cognitively, sure. We expect anxiety, maybe feeling overwhelmed. But chronic high cortisol is strongly linked to clinical depression. It actively messes with brain chemistry, and it causes noticeable cognitive problems, impacting your focus, your memory, your ability to concentrate.
So it literally makes it harder to think clearly, to function day to day.
That's the picture painted. It impairs things like executive function and recall, but the physical and metabolic impacts are just as profound, if not more so. Probably the most well-known one is the accumulation of belly fat.
Ah, the infamous stress belly. Is that a real direct link to cortisol?
According to these sources, yes, absolutely. They explain that your abdominal area has a particularly high concentration of cortisol receptors. So when cortisol levels are chronically high, these receptors in your belly fat cells get constantly stimulated, signaling them to store more fat right there in the midsection. One source put it bluntly, just pumping out all this cortisol and getting fat.
Wow, so even if your overall diet isn't terrible, just being chronically stressed could be driving fat storage specifically around your waist.
That's the mechanism they describe. And that type of fat distribution, the visceral fat, is strongly tied to a whole cluster of dangerous health issues we call metabolic syndrome.
Right, that includes things like high blood sugar, high blood pressure.
Exactly. Metabolic syndrome is tightly linked to both high cortisol and high sugar starch intake. The key features are that midsection fat, elevated blood sugars could be prediabetes or full type 2 diabetes, hypertension, or high blood pressure, and unhealthy blood lipids, like high LDL cholesterol. High cortisol is a major contributor to this whole metabolic mess.
So stress is literally fueling the conditions that lead to heart disease, diabetes, major chronic illnesses.
That's a critical factor. The sources also draw a line between chronic high cortisol and polycystic ovarian syndrome, PCOS.
PCOS, that's a hormonal issue in women, right? Can cause irregular periods, fertility problems, sometimes symptoms like facial hair growth, acne, weight gain around the middle.
That's it. And the sources state pretty directly that PCOS is really coming from high levels of cortisol. They suggest this connection shows how stress, or maybe diet driving up cortisol, like too many carbs, can throw female hormones completely out of balance, leading to conditions like PCOS.
Another major health condition potentially rooted in this stress hormone. What about our bones?
Yeah, this is a really concerning one, especially for women after menopause, but relevant for men too. The sources are quite blunt. Cortisol is very destructive to your bones.
Destructive?
Chronically high cortisol promotes the breakdown of existing bone tissue and simultaneously interferes with the body's ability to build new bone. So you get this net loss of bone density over time, leading to conditions like osteopenia or osteoporosis, making bones weaker and much more susceptible to fractures.
So chronic stress is literally making your skeleton more fragile?
That appears to be the case, based on this material. And one more crucial link, insulin resistance. We know diet, especially sugar, is a huge driver, but the sources emphasize that insulin resistance can also develop directly from the stress itself.
Wait, really? Even with a perfect diet, just being stressed out could make your cells ignore insulin.
That's the implication. High cortisol directly interferes with how insulin signals to your cells and makes them less responsive. So your pancreas has to pump out more and more insulin to try and manage blood sugar, which leads to a whole host of other problems and is a key step towards type 2 diabetes.
Okay, the list of physical consequences is extensive. Brain fog, depression, belly fat metabolic syndrome, PCOS, bone loss, insulin resistance. It really drives home that managing cortisol isn't optional for long-term health.
It really does. It paints a clear picture. And while diet and nutrition are fundamental long-term strategies, the sources also acknowledge that sometimes you need something right now. You're in the thick of it, feeling overwhelmed, mind racing, can't sleep. What can you do in that moment?
Yeah, an emergency eject button from the stress response.
Kind of. They offer a technique described as completely free, very simple, very quick, something you can use on the spot to shift your physiology out of stress mode and into a calmer state, whether it's midday anxiety or trouble falling asleep.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Free, simple, quick. What is it, and how does it work?
It's all about controlled breathing. The mechanism explained is direct. By breathing in a specific controlled way, you consciously activate your parasympathetic nervous system. You hit the brakes on the fight or flight response.
So you can basically manually override your stress response just by changing your breath.
That's the idea, and the power it seems to hold. And the list of reported benefits in the sources is pretty staggering for such a simple practice. They suggest it can increase levels of DHEA, that precursor to sex hormones. It's also said to boost immune defenses, increase oxytocin, the love hormone, linked to bonding and pleasure, plus lower blood pressure and slow down your pulse rate.
Wow. Boost helpful hormones, improve immunity, lower blood pressure, just by breathing differently.
That's what the material lays out. It's also linked to increasing alpha brain waves, which is the brain state associated with being calm yet alert, like during meditation. And it's even said to support key neurotransmitters, like dopamine and serotonin.
Okay, it does sound almost too good to be true. What's the specific technique called?
The sources discuss it in the context of something termed Heart Coherence 365.
Heart coherence. What does that mean?
The underlying concept, as presented, is about bringing your heart's rhythm into a more regular, smooth, sine wave-like pattern. This synchronized state, or coherence, is thought to create better communication and harmony between your heart and your emotions, and between your heart and your brain, leading to improved overall function.
Interesting. And the 365 part, is that like do it every day?
It's actually a formula for how to do it. The 3 means practice it 3 times a day. The 6 stands for the target breathing rate, 6 breaths per minute. And the 5 means do it for 5 minutes each time.
Okay, 3 times a day, 6 breaths a minute for 5 minutes. That's super specific and actually sounds pretty manageable time-wise.
It does. And the key is the quality of the breath. Controlled, deep, and even. To get 6 breaths a minute, you're looking at roughly a 5-second inhale and a 5-second exhale. Much slower than normal breathing.
Right, slowing everything down. And where should you feel the breath? In your chest?
No. Crucially, the sources emphasize breathing from your stomach using your diaphragm. You should feel your belly expand outward as you inhale and gently pull back in as you exhale. That deep diaphragmatic breath is apparently key to really engaging the parasympathetic system.
Deep belly breaths. Got it. Any other pro tips on the technique itself?
Yes, one source adds a specific recommendation based on their findings. Try to breathe through your nose, both in and out.
Through the nose. Why does that matter for this deep breathing?
The explanation given is that nasal breathing helps you retain a little bit more carbon dioxide, CO2, in your system compared to mouth breathing. And while it might sound bad, a slightly higher CO2 level actually helps the hemoglobin in your red blood cells release oxygen more effectively into your tissues and brain. It improves oxygen delivery at the cellular level.
That is counterintuitive. I would have thought you want maximum oxygen in, CO2 out.
Apparently, that little bit of CO2 is important for the transfer. So the full technique package is 3 times a day for 5 minutes, breathe slowly, aiming for 6 breaths, deeply using your diaphragm, evenly, and preferably through your nose.
And the sources kind of anticipate the reaction, don't they? Like, seriously, breathing can do all that.
They absolutely do. They acknowledge it sounds incredibly simple, maybe too simple, but they emphasize the reported benefits and positive personal experiences. One speaker shared using it effectively when waking up stressed in the middle of the night. Just starting that slow, rhythmic breathing helped them calm right down and go back to sleep. They also mentioned using it to help fall asleep in the first place.
So it's a tool for both putting out fires and for just general maintenance, like sleep hygiene?
Exactly. Immediate relief and long-term support. And it brings us back full circle to something we talked about earlier for tracking progress. Heart rate variability, HRV.
Ah, using those devices to measure it.
Right. The sources suggest that using an HRV tracker is a great way to get objective feedback on the state of your autonomic nervous system, that sympathetic-parasympathetic balance. And they specifically state that consistently practicing techniques like this Heart Coherence 365 breathing is something that will measurably improve your HRV score over time.
So you can actually see the positive changes happening physiologically.
Precisely. HRV becomes a concrete way to track your progress, and they link a higher, more robust HRV score to having greater health reserve and your fitness reserve, basically, a sign of your body's overall resilience and capacity to handle challenges.
That's a really empowering way to look at it. Okay, wow. We've covered a huge amount of ground here. Understanding that core stress response, how modern life, and especially sugar, can hijack it, the really widespread physical fallout from chronic high cortisol.
Then identifying those specific nutritional allies, the B vitamins, choline, minerals, vitamin D, probiotics, green tea, that help support the calming side of the equation.
And finally, landing on this free, simple, but apparently quite powerful breathing technique, the 365 method, that you can start using immediately, and even track its effects with HRV. It feels like a really solid toolkit based on these sources.
It really does. It highlights that deep interconnectedness, how your diet impacts your nerves, how your gut impacts your brain, how your breath impacts your hormones. It gives you a clear sense of the problem, but also multiple practical avenues for solutions.
Yeah, what really strikes me is how things that seem totally unrelated, like eating leafy greens versus practicing slow breathing, might actually be working on the same underlying system, influencing those stress hormones and your overall state of well-being.
Which leads to a great question for you, the listener, to maybe reflect on. Now that you've heard all this from the sources, understanding the stress mechanisms, the impact of cortisol, the potential dietary and lifestyle, fixes what's maybe one small, simple change or practice you might consider exploring first. Something you can start today to begin gently nudging your own stress response in a better direction.